be recording this session. So do please feel free to look at this later if you need to. I just saw a question chat already about sending the PowerPoint out. We won't be sending this out, but we will be posting the link to this online on the EANS website. So if you'd like access to this afterwards, by all means, please go ahead and access this information there. With that in mind, we will go ahead and get rolling here. So just to make sure we're all in the same, we're all here for the same reason, this is the emergency assistance.
Justin, unmute yourself, please.
There we go. That would probably be helpful. So did we hear any of what I just said or none of it? Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. You get the welcome twice. You just didn't realize it the first time. Welcome everybody. Thanks again. Like I said, we are recording this, so do please look out for the recording online, posted on our website once this is done for the day. I would say give us a little while to actually get this live online. It won't be immediate, but you can check on the EANS website to get that information. And with that being said, we'll go ahead and dive right in. So this is today about the EANS program, the Emergency Assistance to Nonpublic Schools, round 1. We will be talking through just a level setting again as a reminder of what the EANS program is. We'll review the program timeline and eligibility, as well as the use of funds and what constitutes funds, because importantly with this, again, we are not distributing funds, we're distributing services and assistance or reimbursement therefore. We will talk about the social vulnerability index that we're using for our low-income student calculations. I just want to make sure, since that's probably new to many of us, that we all understand what that is and how that plays a part in this program administration. We'll talk about the actual processing of reimbursement payments and the procurements of services and assistance. We'll talk about any documentation needed for the application, and then we'll actually walk question by question through the application itself. And so we noticed already that we do have some schools that have submitted their full applications already. So if any of you happen to be on the call, props, and thanks for getting those in. And with that in mind, we'll dive right into our first topic here. So what is EANS? What is the Emergency Assistance to Nonpublic Schools program?
Justin,
the goal of this initiative is...
This is Nicole. I'm sorry, can I interrupt you for just 5 seconds?
Of course.
Hi everyone, this is Nicole Obregon. I work with Justin at the MSDE. A couple of quick housekeeping issues before we dive into the meat and potatoes of why you're all here. You do not have to sign in the chat. We have an RSVP list in the event as to who's here. So there's no need to sign in. We anticipate there being questions that come up throughout this presentation, and we'll save time at the end also. But please use the Q&A feature of this WebEx meeting to post any questions that occur to you throughout the presentation. Please don't put your questions in the chat, put them in the Q&A, and it should be at the bottom of the WebEx app. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Nicole. And a quick note here to that housekeeping end. My name is Justin Dayhoff. I should probably introduce myself. I'm the Assistant State Superintendent for Financial Planning, Operations, and Strategy. I'm also available for questions as we go along. I know I've spoken to some already, as has Nicole, and of course, as has Donna Gunning from our Fiscal Policy and Analysis Office. So we are pleased to be here continuing to support this program, and we are grateful for your patience as we continue with the administration of EANS Round 1. So diving back in here, the purpose of EANS 1 is to support the safe opening and operating of non-public schools during the pandemic. EANS 1 is a part of many acronyms floating around related to COVID pandemic relief, particularly COVID relief for schools specifically. And so just to be really clear about where exactly this program comes from, this was part of the CRSA, also known as the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021. Part of CRSA was the authorization of something called the GEAR Fund, the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. And part of the GEAR Fund is specifically the EANS program here, in which case the EANS I is the Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools that's a part of the CRSA bill. And that's the one we're talking about today. Couple of heads up on timelines. So this is all available as well. Of course, I mentioned that we're going to be posting this online afterwards, but this information is already contained in the grant guidance information that's online and was sent out at the start of the, shortly before the start of the grant period. The application window, as you all know, opened last week, and we have some customer service support sessions today. We have another one coming up on the 1st. The application deadline is February 4th by midnight. And I've had a couple questions already on why that timeline and why so soon, and can we extend that timeline, or, et cetera. And I just want to be really clear. Unfortunately, because of the quick turnaround that we have with procurement, and we'll get into in a moment, we really aren't in a position, we cannot extend that end deadline. So we do encourage you all to work expeditiously on submitting those applications if you're planning to do so. We will then begin processing the applications for completeness and making sure applicants are eligible on February 7th. And then we'll roll that up into scopes of work for services and assistance requested shortly thereafter. The next big date on the program timeline is Board of Public Works session. So again, as we'll talk about in a minute here, this program will require the Maryland State Department of Education to procure services and assistance in order to administer the program. Our contracts, particularly contracts that are over $200,000, require approval from the Board of Public Works, and so we'll have to go to the board in order to get those approved before we can then begin to offer, sign the contract with the vendors, and then begin to administer the requested services, requested and approved services and assistance. At the conclusion of the June of this year, any amount that we know will not be getting used on services and assistance, we will be reverting back to the governor's, to the GEAR Fund. Our hope is, of course, that everybody exhausts the amount of funding. We certainly know that that's the intention. Schools, you do have until September of 2023 to maintain the use of services or systems.
Justin, unmute yourself, please.
I think I'm unmuted now. Am I unmuted now? Okay. Weird. Okay. So you have until September 2023 to maintain the use of services and assistance associated with the EANS I program, after which point we'll discuss and release information on, and leading up to that, of course, we'll discuss the retrieving any procured services or assistance where that is necessary. On to eligibility here. A couple notes on eligibility. Non-public schools that are eligible meet the state definition of an elementary and secondary education, comply with the regulatory definition of elementary school. This is an important one here. Well, these are all important, of course, but this is a nuanced one particular to this program that programs will not apply for or receive a loan under the PPP program on or after December 27, 2020, right? So before that, you're okay. After December 27, 2020 would render an applicant ineligible. I'm actually going to edit myself here. The compliance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is actually not a requirement of this program because we are not awarding funds directly to non-public schools as part of this grant, right? We are Title VI is not a requirement of eligibility for EANS I. In addition to that, as far as program status goes, you of course have to be authorized or registered to operate in Maryland, and you have to have been operating since and open prior to March 13th of 2020. So if you have started or opened after March 13th of 2020, you are not an eligible non-public school. Also, you cannot be a standalone preschool. Standalone preschools are not eligible. Use of funds. So, and again, I want to be really clear here when I talk about use of funds. When I talk about use of funds today, I'm talking specifically about the overall funding and how we will use them for services and assistance, as well as eligible reimbursements. Funds, though, again, are not administered through this program, right? We are directly providing services and assistance, or we are providing reimbursement for something that the State Department of Education would then have ownership thereof. We are not providing funds directly to any non-public schools. It's just a technical distinction, but it is nonetheless an important one. Services or assistance. So all of the available services and assistance listed under the statute associated with the EANS program are able to be requested through the application process of this grant. So supplies for sanitization, disinfecting schools and school facilities, PPE, improving ventilation systems, any training or PD related to this work, physical barriers in order to facilitate social distancing, for example, other material supplies or equipment that require to implement public health protocols, including those that are referenced under guidelines from the CDC, particularly as they relate to the safe reopening and continued operation of school facilities. Those are all okay, as well as the expanding capacity for testing and monitoring testing or any surveillance and contact tracing efforts. Any technology required, particularly in assisting with remote and hybrid learning, and assisting students in continued instructional delivery amidst the pandemic. Any redevelopment of instructional plans, including PD or curriculum development, associated with learning loss or to adapting instruction to be delivered in either a hybrid or some sort of remote environment. Efforts to initiate or maintain education and support services for that remote learning. Any leasing of sites or spaces that are required associated with the CDC's protocols on social distancing, spacing, and healthy and safe opening and operating guidelines, as well as reasonable transportation costs. So those are, in total, all the services and assistance areas that you are allowed to request, both for services and assistance and for reimbursement through this round. And that's all of them that are associated with the law. One thing to note here that we've added is, as I noted, the SVI, or Social Vulnerability Index. And this comes into play with regard to low-income student calculations. And as we noted in the grant guidance for this program, and as per the law, we are required to preference low-income students in the delivery of this program. We are aware, though, that a lot of our non-public schools don't necessarily have the data collection efforts in place, or certainly the same data collection efforts across all of our non-public schools. Social Vulnerability Index is actually a measure created by the CDC to address and attend to local communities' ability to respond to and rebound from the effects of external stressors and disasters, essentially. This, of course, fits into that, but notably here, right, socioeconomic status is one of the key drivers of social vulnerability in the CDC's measure. Several states are actually using SVI now for a number of different programs and grant programs with regard to eligibility calculations or formulas for awards, et cetera. So what we will be doing is we will use the value of the Social Vulnerability Index of the site where the non-public schools are located in order to determine the low-income count. So what we'll do is we'll take that amount, we will then multiply that by the total enrollment in order to determine low-income eligibility. We do still require and ask for local low-income eligibility from via free and reduced price meal certification or scholarship and tuition programs. We do still need you to submit those data. They can be estimated, so please don't feel the need to necessarily dive into that too much. I'll explain why in a second here as we get to that, but just I wanted to be really clear about what Social Vulnerability Index is. If you are interested in figuring out what your school's what your non-public school's Social Vulnerability Index value is, you can do so online. And so again, this is actually in the guidance materials that we distributed with the grant, with the EANS program. But you can visit the website directly through this link. I'll actually do that in a moment here. But You can visit the link, and then on top here on the page is you can input the address. Again, it's the address of the site. And then once you click into it, you can actually click the space and it'll give you this little pop-up. And that's where you get your overall SVI score. And so just to demonstrate what exactly that looks like, I'm going to show everybody now. Okay, so on the website here, if I were to type in the address here of the State Department of Education, I would just go in, type 200 West Baltimore Street, Baltimore, Maryland. I would click the link. It takes me here, and I can click there. And again, I see, just like in the screenshot, what our SVI is. So that's how you would look that up if you wanted to do that on your own. We, of course, will be doing that in our review of the applications. You don't need to actually provide that with your application, but I nonetheless wanted to show you all that in case you happen to be curious as you are working on your application. Oh, my apologies here. Let me just, there we go. Okay, is everybody still seeing the SVI? Great, okay. Okay, payment processing and procurement. So payment processing, again, in this way corresponds only to reimbursements, right? Those are the only payments that we'll be paying through non-public schools. Everything else, the state will be procuring directly. The application closes on February 4th, at which point we at the department will be working to just validate, check for eligibility and completeness of applications. We'll be reaching out accordingly for any missing or incomplete information there as well. At which point we'll roll up the final requested and approved items to determine scopes of work. And we will then rely on either existing statewide contracts or a couple of purchasing consortia of which we are a part in order to determine the vendors. Again, the state, we will be determining the vendors that will be doing this work. We will bring those vendors, those potential vendor contracts to the Board of Public Works for final approval. Once those contracts are approved, we then will work with the vendors to directly administer the services and assistance that participating non-public schools are going to receive through the program. As far as the documentation goes, when you're actually getting ready to fill out the application, these are a couple things just to make sure you are prepped with so that you can just walk on into the application, fill it on out, and be done and ready to go. First one is your school's total student enrollment data, just total student enrollment. That's it. There's a box in the application you'll see just to enter that value. Same thing with your school's low-income student enrollment data. Again, for this, we're looking for either free reduced price meal eligibility specifically or school tuition scholarship information. These can be estimations. Again, I know that not all of our non-public schools collect this information. We are going to be using the Social Vulnerability Index. We are collecting this nonetheless to help inform our process for ARP EANS and the next round of EANS as we start to look at these data and what will work best. So that's why we are requiring those points of data. But again, this is not something you should lose sleep over, nor is it something that you should let hinder or delay the submission of your application. You'll want to download the certification form, which is just the final signatures. Because this is an online application, this is our way to make sure that a human, an eligible human at your program, your non-public school, is signing off on the application, as well as the funding worksheet we'll talk through in a second, and an updated W-9 form. That funding worksheet is particularly important and helpful for us because this is where you will be listing out the different services and assistance that you are requesting either through direct service and assistance or through reimbursement. Once you go online, you can access this. There's also a link to this in the actual application itself. When you go to this page, I'm actually going to go ahead again and open the actual sheet here that you'll have access to. All right, and so this is the funding worksheet. When you click in here, you'll fill this first field with the school name. Again, please do make sure that the school name that you list here exactly matches the school name that you put in the application, which should also match whatever school name is listed in your W-9. You're going to want to make sure that all three of those things are the same, right? Then from there, once you go in here, you can click through what your priorities are, right? And so first item, we want you to flag what the priority order is, right? So things that are the most highest of priority down through the least priority. If everything is high priority, we will just assume that the topmost on your list is the highest of priorities. So do please be thoughtful when you're entering that information. Then you're going to select the funding area. These correspond to all those different allowable services and assistance categories. So this allows us to group, as we are processing these forms, all of the information back appropriately to where that will go. And then again, this is just flagging whether it's service, direct service or assistance you're looking for. And the same question here on reimbursement. Is this reimbursement or is this direct service or assistance? From there, these are fields that the applicants that you all will fill out, right? So you're going to put the quantity in here. Let's say you're requesting Chromebooks for hybrid learning, right? Something to that effect. And so that quantity would go here and the description would go there in the next field to explain what exactly those are. Again, be mindful of the funding area here, particularly when you're filling out your description. Please be clear so that we know that that description does map back to the funding area for what you're requesting. And then the approximate dollar amount. And I want to be really clear here. These are approximate dollar amounts. Just like with low-income students, this should not be an area for which you are spending a ton of time, right? Particularly because we, at the end of the day, are going to be using state-procured vendors, and you won't necessarily have those costs in front of you. However, to the extent that you are able, and again, taking the Chromebooks as an example, to ballpark those figures, it certainly helps us when we're determining those final amounts and how those are distributed. But that's all that goes on this form. I'm going to pop back over here to the presentation. Okay. And now we're going to go to the application itself. So the application, again, it's online. You can access the link either through the guidance documentation that we released or directly through the Maryland EANS website that we have set up for this effort. And Nicole actually already placed a link for that in the chat, and I think she may have done that again just a moment ago. So by all means, do please follow that to the application. Oh, great, and Nicole actually placed a direct link to the application itself, as well as resources. Pardon me, I'm just gonna pull this over here. Okay, so when you're in the application, the first question is going to be, what type of non-public school are you? Are you a church-exempt school? Are you a private pay-approved school? Or are you a publicly funded approved school? From there, you're going to choose your school name from the list of church-exempt schools. And so we have pre-populated this in order to make this a little easier. Again, it's important for us, like I mentioned, that your school name on the funding form and your W-9 tie through. So this is one way that we're hopefully trying to help you out a little bit by making sure that those are there. And then the rest of the information there, right? Street address, zip code, email, phone number, federal tax ID. Important to note here when you're completing those extra pieces of information at the bottom, this is the school location, right? So not a head office if it's separate, this is where the site is located. That's particularly important because that will be the value that we use when we're running our social vulnerability index determinations. Then we ask a couple questions to help make sure that your non-public school is indeed eligible. And so the first one is, of course, asking if your school is a non-public school. And we link directly, if you have any questions about that at all, we link here directly back to where you can find those definitions in state law in the Maryland Education article. And we also ask about your registration operation status and that you were indeed operating and open prior to March 13th, 2020. We have a check here about the PPP loan. Again, just be mindful that this isn't if you ever received or applied for one. This is only asking if you ever received or applied for or plan to apply for PPP after December 27th, 2020. Okay, please note that distinction. From there, you're going to go ahead and load in your enrollment. And like I mentioned at the beginning, this is just putting in the information here. So you're just going to note your total enrollment. And then after that, you will note what your estimated number of low-income students from low-income families are in the 2019-2020 school year. Again, that's 2019-2020 school year. The three types of data source that we're allowing for that are your FARMS data, if you're free and reduced price meal eligibility data, any scholarship data or financial assistance data. Please don't, like I noted before, that we are using this to help us inform how we're going to make low-income determinations, and the data we'll use for that for ARP EANS, which will follow this administration of EANS. So we do ask that you fill that out, though again, please don't lose sleep or delay the processing or submission of your application if you're having trouble making that determination. And in fact, to respond to Rhonda's comment or question in the Q&A, are we able to use Title I income survey data for the SVI? I just want to be clear here. You don't have to do anything for the SVI. We are doing the SVI calculation. It will be done regardless of what is put in here. SVI is based on your census tract location, and it's not tied to any of the data that you would likely be providing. That being said, Title I income survey, particularly as it relates to FARMS data, would be sufficient for our ask as well. And then this is where you upload the data source to verify those low-income student counts, right? So you're using that Title I eligibility form, financial assistance data, whatever it might be. This is where you have the opportunity to load that in. And question 11 is just given what you listed as your low-income student count and your total enrollment, what proportion do you have? And Michelle, yes, I mean, if you all want to make it, so Michelle, we'd like for, if you have available FRPM or scholarship or financial assistance data, for you all to use that. Again, making the distinction here that we are asking because this is actually giving us a little bit of a head start on the next EANS administration because we don't have some of the same flexibility in the law to use SVI in the same way. And so this is just us getting there. So Michelle, we prefer that these data sources be the mechanism you use for those. Again, they can be estimates though. As far as the funding goes, the EANS program funding may be used for services and assessments to address education disruptions, just like it says at the beginning, just like we talked about at the program overview. This is where you're just going to notify us of areas that you are requesting an award for. And I want to be clear here once more when it comes to award and funding. Award constitutes being eligible to participate in the program, and funding are dollars that we'll be administering through services and assistance or through reimbursements of services and assistance that we, as the State Department of Education, will retain ownership of. And then this is where you then back that up with the funding document sheet. And so there's a link here directly in the SurveyMonkey application for that funding worksheet. It's also on the website. But you have a couple of different ways to access that file, but you'll upload it here when you're completing the application. We do request a point of contact for the application so that if we have a follow-up or if there's something missing that we have a question about, that we know who exactly to contact, and which will hopefully make turnaround time easier and swifter for all of you as well as the department. That's why we asked this question here. And then we also have assurances, and these are the assurances that we have to include. These are part of the statute and the grant award that we receive for this program. So do please keep that in mind when you are going through here. These are not these aren't assurances that we are throwing on for the sake of having a good old time. These are required here by law in order to be eligible for and to demonstrate continued eligible use of funds. And so the application lists those out here, and you do have to check all of them. If you don't, the application will kick you back until you do, just because you would not be eligible for an award if you didn't have those checked off. Last couple of pieces here, I mentioned the certification form, and that's just a signature page that you'll download and upload again. You can either do that in advance through the website, or you can do that as you're filling out the application, download it, sign it, print it, scan it back up, and load it in. Same thing with the W-9 form. The W-9 form, again, is particularly important, particularly when it comes to reimbursements. And I want to call attention one more time. Please make sure that the entity listed in the W-9 matches the school name that you list on the funding sheet. And then, of course, that grand, wonderful, exciting moment when you have completed the application, you'll go ahead and submit it, and that'll come right through to us, at which point we'll begin the processing of that application. So I know we covered a lot today, between documentation, some program overview information, and the application itself. But I also wanted to be sure that we had some extra time for questions and answers today. We do have a couple in the chat already, or not in the chat, in Q&A. A reminder to that end, particularly as we open it up here. If you do have questions, please drop them in the Q&A feature of the WebEx. Do not drop them in the chat. We'll respond to them in the Q&A section. But just know that even outside of this, you do have additional opportunities to continue asking questions. We have another customer service support session on February 4th. In addition to that, we do also have an email inbox that we're monitoring. I know many of you use that, of course, to RSVP for the webinar today. So do please feel free to continue using that. We also have live phone support available Monday through Saturday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And so if you're filling out the application, or if you have other questions about guidance or the policies or procedures that we're using for this program, you can always reach out during that time to speak to somebody then as well. With that in mind, I've got one more question here in the Q&A. Can you discuss what is eligible for reimbursement for services procured by MSDE? So, Michelle, anything listed under the services and assistance is eligible to be requested for reimbursement. So as long as it's on that list that you would use, that is just discretion of the non-public school. And with that, we'll give it another minute or two for, okay, great. For what time period would that cost be incurred? Great question. So reimbursements are eligible for up to June 27th, 2021. June 27th, 2021. Okay, anything outside of that, you're going to have to request direct services or assistance. Because the law requires, so the way and the reason for that timing is we are only allowed by law to issue reimbursements for the first 6 months that we have the grant award from the moment it was signed by the United States Department of Education. It was signed on January 27th, 2021, and so we can reimburse eligible eligible expenses for participating non-public schools in that window, to January 27th through June 27th, 2021. Good morning. I have a few questions. Can prior expenses be reimbursed? I mean, so Stacy, yes, in the sense that all expenses should be prior, right? Given the restriction on the reimbursement timeline. All of those would have to be prior because of that time frame. Our central ventilation system needs service and may need some work. Can this be covered? Yes. So one thing that's really important to note here, and this is truly a wonky part of the law, is that we are making available the opportunity to request all of the services and assistance listed under law associated with the EANS I program. Again, all non-public schools are free to absolutely, as part of this process, request any services or assistance listed that relate to those lists that are in the applications, in the guidance, and in the law. MSDE, as part of its review, will determine what we can actually provide, in part because, to your point, Stacy, MSDE does retain ownership. And so it is a challenge, for example, if you're going to replace Windows, the MSD would have to figure out how in about a year and a half to come and collect those windows. The MSD, same thing with the Chromebooks, for example, right? Those will get asset tags from the Department of Education, and we will retain ownership of those materials. Peculiarity of the EANS program is that it is direct services and assistance from the State Department of Education. There's no award going through in terms of dollar amount or ownership passing through to non-public schools. And as far as, let me see, I'm concerned about the statement. Yes, okay, so that's the answer to that one, Stacy. I know it is certainly unique. Is there an approved vendor/item list for procurements? No, Rana, because we are going to procure vendors and items based on the requests. We don't do those in advance because despite my best efforts, my mind reading is not up to where it should be, and so we want to make sure that we have to request based on what the programs are requesting and what we're going to be able to provide. So. No, there won't be a list in advance, but we will, again, as applications are approved and participation is awarded, we'll work to keep you all in the loop throughout the procurement process. And it's for that same reason, Donna, that you might not necessarily, you can certainly request a particular brand. By all means, please do so, right? I just cannot guarantee until we go through the full list and we look at the providers and vendors that we'll be using, that we'll be able to grant that specific vendor or that specific brand. With regard to transportation costs, so transportation costs are, follow the same. Well, I guess I should ask, Toyin, what if you could respond in the Q&A specifically what you're asking. So transportation costs as they relate to a non-public school's capacity to safely reopen and recover from the pandemic would be the interpretation. So that's what we'd essentially be looking for there. That being said, what you use, whether it's for example, one of the services and assistance that's allowed is procuring lease, right, for another site. So if you need transportation between sites, something like that, that could perhaps be an example. But I imagine the transportation will vary. The key is keeping it both aligned to, keeping it aligned to the program and the goals of what the EANS program is supposed to help support. Oh, I have to scroll. There we go. Will we get the exact product we request? No, okay. Like I said, Donna, there will likely be substitutions. Could you give more details about the dollar amount we should target? Is it based on any kind of per capita? So no, Jennifer, I would say build out your list of requests as you would. We will, funding will come down to essentially both low income rates and the number and volume of eligible program participants that we have, and the volume of and scope of requests that we grant as a part of that, right? So put it all in there. Be very clear about your priority list, because not everything may get in, depending on how many we get, but do please go ahead and put all of those in. But you don't need to target a particular amount. Stacy's question, is it definite that any materials will be collected by the state? Thus, our school will be in need of purchasing tablets again in a year. So, Stacy, the state will need to recollect and retain ownership of anything that we provide, because the state will continue to own them. Are the expenses for both prior and future expenses? If we're talking about for reimbursements, no. Reimbursements would be for anything, again, in that window, January 27th, 2021 through June 27th, 2021. However, the services and assistance requests for direct provision can, of course, be for, future, right? I mean, we will be procuring these to administer these in the upcoming future. So yes, on that one. I talked about transportation already. Thanks, Toyin. We can submit a mix. Yes, you can absolutely submit a mix of reimbursements as well as requests for services and assistance. Are you saying all infrastructure will need to be removed in the future? Yes, Michelle, that is the challenge of the program, right? And that is why, again, non-public schools, you can and should and are able to request anything that you see here. One of the things that we will be reviewing for when we do these applications is whether or not we actually can provide it, because, to the point of your question, we cannot take back a new HVAC unit, right? So there are certain logistical problems with that. If you have received a prior award, can you apply again? Yes, you absolutely can. Can you discuss leasing of another site? If we've already signed a lease, will MSDE just pay the monthly rent based on a lease? Okay, so to Stephen's question, you can request reimbursements associated with that lease from January 27, 2021 through June 27, 2021. But going forward, the MSDE, if it was for a lease, the MSDE you'd actually be requesting that the MSDE establish the lease. The lease would have to be with the MSDE and the leaseor, again, because MSDE will retain ownership of anything associated with the program. All right, I'll give another minute in case we have any other questions. Our school name is not much.
This is, Nicole Obregon. I just dropped in the chat box a copy, a link to the U.S. Department of Ed's FAQ. It's a 30-page FAQ, so I think they've done a pretty good job of responding to some more specific questions about ventilation systems and transportation costs and what's allowable. So it's a searchable document too. So if anyone would like to look that up too, I put the link in the chat. And we have another question in the Q&A, Justin. Paula asks, due to the type of school we operate, the SVI does not reflect the level of low-income students. Is there any other consideration in the funding methodology to account for this?
So no, there's not, and so we have to pick a criteria in order to do this, and SVI gives us one that can be consistent and measurable both in methodology and in data across all of our non-public schools. So that will be the value that we use for our low-income student calculations. Okay, our school name will not match our W-9. What is the work around this? So I would say, so if your school name is not going to match your W-9, please send us an email just giving us a heads up so that we can flag that on as we process the application to look out for that in advance. Thanks for catching that, Trixie. Like things are always submitted in the EANS first round, or should it be new items? So Emma, you can't be reimbursed for the same item twice. If that's what you're asking, but if you submitted it before and it wasn't granted and you think it was an allowable expense and it occurred between January 27th, 2021 and June 27th, 2021, then you can include that onto your funding document sheet. I see on your FAQ it says the timeline is between March 13th, 2021. Emma, you're right. I'm sorry. Yes, that is the, sorry, let me just, process and timeline. So the timeline for procurement of requested services is, pardon me one sec.
Is this asking about the dates?
Yes. Hold on, so process and timeline for procurement of requested services. So to Paula's question, we are, once we roll up the, let me even pull this up. Okay, here we go. So process and timeline will review your applications, and as they come in, we'll provide, we'll roll those up to determine the scopes of work, and we will then begin the procurement process here at the state. We are relying, like I said, on existing state contracts and purchasing consortia. We won't be putting out new RFPs or anything like that. So we'll be working within those existing competitively bid contracts. in order to do this work expeditiously. Nonetheless, it will still need to go to the Board of Public Works. So we'll get everything in. We'll make a final determinations on the program participants and what we're able to provide, and then we'll provide that notification. We'll work to align that those asks with the vendors that we'll be working with for the program. We'll take those to the Board of Public Works. That takes a couple of months just by the nature of the Board of Public Works process. And so you'll note on the timeline here that we are currently aiming for the April Board of Public Works session. If depending on the volume and types of requests we get in, we're, like I said, aiming for April to get that approved. Once that's done, we can sign the contracts, and then we can begin administering the services and assistance through the vendors. Okay. Does rent of a new space include all utilities and operational expenses? So if you are, again, if you are requesting, depending on what you're looking at, that's reimbursement for the reimbursement period. So then yes, that works there. Again, if it's rent of a new space that you haven't necessarily done yet, you can certainly request that. You can certainly request that. Regarding the return of sorry, everybody, I'm getting lost in my Q&A chat here for a second. Okay. So quick question on, let me just get back to the dates here on the January versus the June piece. Yes, January through June are the dates by which, or through which reimbursements are eligible, well, items are eligible for reimbursement.
Sure. Justin asked that I jump on and talk about the difference between services and assistance. And I just want to be clear that that's language that the federal United States Department of Education included in their documentation. I believe it's also explicitly called out in the law. And so assistance would be, many of you requested reimbursement for your school cleaning contracts that we weren't able to reimburse because MSDE didn't have the contract with the cleaning service. So one of the things, a service that could be procured would be a cleaning service. The assistance that could be provided would be, and I saw this earlier in the Q&A, someone was asking about professional development. That's something that can be procured and we can provide for your staff. Same thing with learning loss and tutoring for students in your schools to address the impact of the pandemic-related learning loss due to lost instructional time. Those are things that services would be the cleaning contract, and the assistance would be direct services provided to students or teachers either through tutoring or professional development or a summer school program or something along those lines. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah. And I do still see Jennifer's question here regarding the service request for future expenses. I mean, I would reach out to the email that you saw on the screen. I'll put that back up here now. But again, for anything in the future, you can't request future reimbursements, right? So anything that you're requesting for reimbursement has to be in that window that I said, and that has passed. Anything for the future, we you'll be requesting to receive that service or assistance MSDE will be procuring the vendors that would be administering that service or assistance. FAQ may be requested for Okay, great, Jennifer. Okay. So everybody just going through, making sure that I'm trying to get all of these. I think we have everything that I'm seeing. Nicole and Donna, anything else you're seeing? To answer Kelly's question, just popped on, yes, they would need to be returned. Consumables do, I believe, Donna can speak to this more, especially from the first round. Consumables do not. But I'll.
No, you're correct. They do not.
And just to be clear, the start date, I'm sorry, I misspoke. The guide is correct. March 13th, 2020 through June 27th, 2021. January, so just to be clear, that January date was when we received the, when our application was approved and signed, and it's 6 months from that date when the reimbursable window ends. But yes, it does go back to March 13th, 2020. So the reimbursements would have to have occurred between March 13th, 2020 and June 27th, 2021. And yes, on receipts. Yes. In general, you know, well, yes. Okay. Stacy, I'm not sure I understand your question about the divider. Is this related to the department needing to take things back at the end? Yeah. So I mean, yes, like anything placed, you know, is again, it's owned by the State Department of Education, right? And so we would need to be able to receive those. And you don't need to submit your receipts with the application, especially because we will finalize amounts and the allocation of those with the processing of the grant, but do, you know, or not grant, but the processing of program participation notices. So just, you know, do though hold on to those, of course. Yes, I will put reimbursements are eligible. Okay, if we ask for PPE, again, consumables, so consumables are not, do not need to be returned. Consumables do not need to be returned for reimbursement. All right. Well, I think at risk of, I know I'll probably get a couple more questions as soon as I'm done, but so yeah, anything. So Stacy, anything as far as the program goes, will, you know, when administering it, if it's particularly thinking Chromebooks again, for example, we'll have MSDE asset tags, et cetera, on those. And how do we find out how many funds we're eligible for? So we will make those determinations. So again, just to be clear, no one is eligible for a particular amount of funds, right? We are administering program direct services and assistance or reimbursement for services and assistance that the State Department of Education would have ownership of. So just want to be clear here there. As far as how we allocate between the schools, I would say just take a look at the grant guidance that we released. That has a clear and more detailed explanation than I can offer in the next 30 seconds of this webinar. Though if you still want further clarification from that, by all means, please either give us a call at the email you see on the screen, or call us at the email, call us at the phone number you see on the screen, or shoot us an email, please, at the address on the screen. All right. Well, with that in mind, I just want to say thank you all to joining. Thank you all for all you do for children and families here in Maryland. Please don't hesitate to reach out, and thank you for your interest in participating in the EANS program. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody.
Excuse me, Justin. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm not getting my question answered. I was wondering about leased laptops. Can we apply for that?
Yes, you can absolutely apply for technology equipment. Are you asking for?
Yeah, we lease the laptops rather than buying because it's cheaper in the long run. So
I understand. So unfortunately, you would have to request that the State Department of Education, engage in a lease laptop program because we would have to procure and go through the vendor process to do that. So no, you could request reimbursement if it was during the reimbursable window for those costs, but you can't going forward request.
Yeah. So anything that we spent on leasing from March 2020 to June 2021, we can request reimbursement for that.
Oh, and those were also leased then? Okay, I'm sorry. So since they were leased, the answer is also no. It's similar to the cleaning service answer that Donna gave earlier. Because we are not the ones who are contracting, we wouldn't, exactly. And because they're leased, and we would have to actually have ownership. That's
okay, correct. I gotcha. Thank you.
Of course, of course. Sorry for not catching that earlier, Lincoln. Okay, all right. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.